Why do all the presidential election pundits keep talking about Wisconsin? Some even say, as Wisconsin goes, so goes the nation. Well, tonight we're going to look at that issue and the critical and evolving role Western Wisconsin voters play.
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy. Wisconsin began its starring role in national politics in the 2016 election. It was one of three states all the polls said Hillary Clinton would win. But Donald Trump narrowly won them all: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The Wisconsin margin was less than 1%, a difference of 20,000 votes. 4 years later, the Wisconsin presidential vote was also within 1%. But this time, Joe Biden edged out Trump and won the presidency. If you look back at past presidential outcomes, especially at 2012 compared to 2016, you can see more western Wisconsin counties turning red for Donald Trump. That was also the case in 2020. Tonight, we're going to take a look at how both parties are trying to bolster their turnout in these counties. Let's start with Matt Rust, the GOP county chair of St. Croix County, which includes Hudson. Well, joining us right now is Matthew Rust. He is the chair of the St. Croix County GOP. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Esme, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk to your viewers.
All right. Obviously,
WCCO has been a staple in the media community in this area for a long time, and we all grew up watching it. And so thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I want to ask you, first of all, I've got to ask you your reaction to the debate, the first debate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, a lot of people weren't necessarily expecting what they saw, but there were a lot of people, I guess, on the right. Republicans have been seeing Joe Biden in a decline state for a long time. I've been trying to get that message out, but I think we saw that on display during the debate. I think Trump did a really good job at just explaining the positions that he has and showing what he believes are the deficiencies in the Biden administration.
Well, of course, everyone agrees that it was a really bad debate for Joe Biden. There were some mistruths, obviously, on both candidates' sides, more mistruths on Trump's side, but clearly he was in command of himself. How are things going in western Wisconsin? I know it's a Republican stronghold, but you've got Democrats kind of making inroads in some of the urban communities. What are you seeing shake out here in terms of the presidential race?
So we're seeing a lot of energy, at least on the Republican side. From 2016 to 2020, we were kind of talking about this earlier, but the Republican vote for President Trump actually went up from 2016 to 2020 by a percentage point. I believe it may even go up more this year just based on the energy that we're seeing. We've had a lot of people joining the Republican Party since 2020. I believe our membership in our county party has tripled.
Wow, that's significant.
Right, in the last few years. We see across the state that President Trump has come here now 3 times recently: Green Bay, Waukesha, and Racine. So he's starting to make inroads.
And does that make a difference when people see, maybe it's not their town, when people see the former president in western Wisconsin?
Yeah, I think it does. People have traveled from way up here to the eastern side of the state just to go to those rallies. Okay. He easily fills 50,000 to 100,000. That's about the average for his rallies. But back to
Do
your,
you think, yeah, let me ask you this. Do you think the enthusiasm is so great for President Trump that he's going to be able to carry the state? I mean, the polls have been up and down, very, very close, obviously.
yeah, and they've been, as they have been in a lot of the states across the country as well, in a lot of the swing states.
But
So,
Wisconsin matters more than many states.
right, yeah, many say that how Wisconsin goes, that's how the presidential election will go. And so there has been a lot of focus on Wisconsin, a lot of effort put here by the RNC, the state Republican Party. They're working very closely with the county parties and have a lot of programs set up to try to increase the vote.
In Western Wisconsin specifically.
Well, across the state, but
Yeah.
yes, we are working closely with them in Western Wisconsin as well, in this area.
And this is the Republican National Congressional Committee or the Republican Party?
The Republican National Committee, RNC,
RNC.
and then
Okay.
working with the Republican Party of Wisconsin, and then the Republican Party of Wisconsin works with us,
Okay.
and then
Okay.
but we're a little bit more independent. Each of the county parties
Sure.
is a little more independent, but we are really doing a lot, as much as we can in our county. We've opened a new office in December in downtown Hudson.
And
So
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off because we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's really interesting information.
yeah, well, thank you so much, Esme. It's been great to be here.
Coming up, hear from representatives of both parties, the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party and a spokesperson for the state GOP. All right, well, joining us right now is Ben Wikler, and he is the chair of the Democratic Party in Wisconsin. Thank you so much for coming on.
Great to be with you today.
I've got to ask you first off your reaction to the debate.
President Biden, not a great night. He's not a great debater. That's never been his strength. What he's really good at is being president. He's been such a successful president on so many fronts. Compared to every other developed nation in the world, he's been able to tame inflation and ensure we didn't fall into recession, historic growth in jobs, 15 million jobs across the country. And relentlessly, he's fought for middle-class families and for freedom against people trying to ban abortion and disrupt our democracy. So this is, it's a rough moment, and it's the kind of moment when you have to step back and look at the stakes in this election. What Trump was promising from the stage and what he's promising in his campaign, it's frankly terrifying. And we know that President Biden has this country's back. So we are gearing up for a big push to ensure that democracy survives this moment of crisis. You mentioned inflation. I've been talking to a lot of voters in various areas of Minnesota, and they're not seeing, I know that you're right, of course, in terms of the numbers on inflation, but a lot of consumers aren't seeing it. Absolutely. There's nothing more infuriating than going to the grocery store and finding that they're blaming President Biden. Yeah, no, it's frustrating when the price of eggs is high, when things cost more than they used to. Prices are still higher than they were before the COVID spike. And President Biden has relentlessly focused on pushing down costs. If you look at things like the cost of insulin, if you're on Medicare, he's able to bring down the cost to $35 a month. He's taking on junk fees from places like Ticketmaster and airlines. It is bit by bit. We also know that these big companies want to price gouge. We have all these recordings from the earnings calls of big corporations where they say they could jack up the price and consumers would just have to pay it. So this is a long run fight. The question is, going forward, who's on our side? Can we switch gears, because we've got a limited time, just on Western Wisconsin. Absolutely. Traditionally, obviously a Republican stronghold. There are some things that have been going on in Wisconsin, new maps. Do you think you can make inroads this time around? And are you trying to make inroads to boost that Democratic vote in Western Wisconsin? Absolutely. In Western Wisconsin, there are a lot of counties that are some of the swingiest counties in the state of Wisconsin and some of the swingiest in the country. So this is an area where we can absolutely organize and fight to win. We've seen in Western Wisconsin, in the 3rd Congressional District, it went for Tony Evers both times. We saw Biden do better than Clinton did in Western Wisconsin in 2020 versus 2016. And we have an opportunity to win multiple state legislative seats, 3 different districts that we think are up for grabs for Democrats to flip in Western Wisconsin alone. And the 3rd congressional district, which is currently represented by someone who went to the insurrection on January 6th and then lied about it afterwards, who's made national headlines for screaming at teenagers, Derek Van Orden. Against, we have a multi-candidate field on the Democratic side. All the Democratic candidates are adamant about defending democracy, defending reproductive freedom, and sticking up for rural communities who need a real voice in Washington, not a rubber stamp for the ultra MAGA faction of the GOP like we have with Derek Van Orden. So that is a real fight. And the energy among grassroots Democrats in Western Wisconsin is infectious. If you show up at an event, you're going to be flooded with energized folks who are ready to knock on doors to win races up and down the ballot.
Well, and of course, these redistricting maps, which went into effect and are in effect now and for this election, I mean, that's what people have said long said about Wisconsin is that if you look at the polling numbers, it's even, yet Republicans have this enormous advantage. Are we going to see that Democratic advantage coming through? And are we going to see voters enthusiastic about it?
Absolutely. The Republican gerrymander of Wisconsin was really a painful sight to behold because it meant that, especially in Western Wisconsin and Northern Wisconsin, in areas where there were tons of Democrats, there were hardly any Democratic elected officials. And in this election, that is going to change. There's going to be patches of blue opening up and spreading. I think Eau Claire is a great example where there are 2 different state assembly seats that are currently held by Republicans that now will reflect the community, a very Democratic community. And I think we have a very clear shot at flipping them. That's the 92nd and 93rd. If you look at St. Croix County, Hudson and North Hudson and Pierce County, this is an area where there's a ton of Democrats. It's been trending blue, but the gerrymander...
A ton of growth, but
exactly.
Historically it's gone Republican. I mean, that would be a big turnaround for you.
It would be a big change, but it's the change that reflects the people. The whole idea of representative democracy is that people are supposed to choose their representatives, not politicians choosing their voters. Now, finally, in Wisconsin, voters have a chance to decide who represents them because the lines aren't rigged. So Shannon Zimmerman, very right-wing Republican from Western Wisconsin, is going to have a real fight on his hands. And I think there's every chance that Allison Page, the great Democratic candidate in the 30th Assembly District, could turn a blue area into having a blue representative in Madison.
Well, listen, thank you so much, Ben Wikler. We really appreciate it, and we'll obviously be paying a lot of attention, as we do all the time, to Western Wisconsin. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, joining us right now is Matt Fisher. He is the spokesperson for the Republican Party of Wisconsin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be on.
Let me ask you, what impact did the debate, President Biden's performance in the debate, have or is having right now on the campaign and on the status of things in Wisconsin?
Well, I don't think it changed anything about Joe Biden. I think it just revealed him for what he is, unfortunately. The debate confirmed what we already knew from the Hur report, the special counsel's report that described Joe Biden as an elderly man with a fading memory, someone who couldn't remember basic information about his own personal and professional life. It also confirmed the fact that the Biden administration is frankly running out of ideas and has little to no credibility with the American people. Look, they kept telling the American people, and especially the people of Wisconsin, they kept telling us that the economy was great. They kept telling us the border was secure. And they kept telling us that Joe Biden was doing cartwheels and doing trigonometry behind the scenes. Well, now
Not
we
quite,
know
but
those lies they're all 3 lies. All 3 of them.
In terms of the outlook for the state, the last poll I saw for Wisconsin was absolutely tied. I mean, it's been just, going back and forth. Overall, right now, as we sit, how does it look from your perspective, the statewide race in Wisconsin, and where does Western Wisconsin play into how important is Western Wisconsin to the GOP?
Western Wisconsin is critical to any Republican victory, not just in the presidential race, but also in the Senate election between Tammy Baldwin and Eric Hovde. And in terms of the polling, it's important to remember that in 2020, Biden was ahead by 6 points in the Real Clear Politics average and won by less than 1%. So if the race is tied right now, even if the polling is off by less than half of what it was in 2020, the Republicans are going to sweep the state in terms of the presidential and the Senate race. The key here ultimately, though, is going to be the return on investment in terms of how Republicans versus Democrats can translate their resources and their personnel into wins. And we saw in the April 2nd primary, despite outspending us and having more offices, the Wisconsin Democrats had a pretty brutal April 2nd primary. So we feel confident about where the polls stand and also where the dynamics of the race lie, especially in Western Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin, there has been redistricting, which obviously, it's a big deal. It's been debate about it, it's going on for years, but there has been redistricting. Democrats are hopeful that this is going to boost turnout, Democratic turnout, Democratic enthusiasm that will carry through to the presidential race. In other words, not down ballot enthusiasm, but up ballot enthusiasm. Do you think that's going to be the case, especially in Western Wisconsin? Are we going to see more Democrats come out because they feel that their vote can make a difference for all the races?
Well, I can't tell what the Democrats actually think because Ben Wikler, the chairman of the Wisconsin Democrats, is bragging about these maps. But these maps were opposed overwhelmingly by the Democratic lawmakers at the State House. It was Republicans who actually delivered the critical votes here to pass these maps into law. So if we're actually looking at the people whose jobs are at stake here, the actual representatives and state senators, it seems that the Republicans are more confident in these maps than the Democrats are. Look, ultimately, every new set of maps presents new challenges. I think the Republicans are in a good place, especially not just with the maps, but more importantly with how Wisconsinites, especially blue-collar, working-class families in, out west in the state and cities like La Crosse and beyond, I think they're going to immediately recognize and understand that Republicans here are focused on winning elections, and no amount of Democratic spin on the maps they oppose is going to change that.
And the impact of having the Republican convention in Wisconsin, I know there's been controversy about where the president's going to stay. He's going to stay in Wisconsin. But what impact do you think that will have on the vote in Wisconsin? The Republican vote in Wisconsin?
It'll be enormous because I think that it'll highlight the Republican Party is the party of the Midwest. It's the party of working people. It's not absorbed with the high rises and Hollywood types, the individuals who are donating to the Wisconsin Democratic Party. We're about ultimately building grassroots support around blue collar communities. I think having it in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, a city that's been plagued by Democratic policies that have failed them, but with an optimistic vision for the future that can help revitalize education, the economy, jobs, opportunity, and border security, I think it's going to be a big plus for our party come November.
Okay. And I think some people in Milwaukee will take issue with one characterization by the president, but of it being a horrible city. But you're saying, it sounds like you're thinking it's really going to boost Republican enthusiasm for November.
Well, I think it's interesting that the president explained what he was referring to, and there's more outrage among Democrats at the president describing the problems of Milwaukee than at the actual problems themselves. Look, Milwaukee's had a violent crime problem. It has an issue in terms of education. We see the public school system there. We also look at the fact in terms of the economic circumstances that have the decline of, home affordability of rent prices have soared. It's not controversial here. And I think working Wisconsinites understand Milwaukee needs to have major changes. The president has the policies under his administration that will deliver that. And ultimately, that's a step forward for both Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the rest of the United States.
Matt Fisher, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It's been great to be on. Thanks so much.
Up next, analysis from a Wisconsin political science professor. Joining us right now is Assistant Professor Anthony Chergosky from the University of Wisconsin, La Crosse. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Okay. You're a political scientist. Let me ask you, first of all, do you think the disastrous showing by President Biden, what everybody's calling disastrous, is going to have much of an impact on the vote in Wisconsin?
I do. And I say that because the last two presidential elections here in Wisconsin have been decided by about 20,000 votes each. So nowadays, Wisconsin is so divided that things that happen in the campaign aren't going to move a lot of people, but they don't need to in order for the events of the campaign to have a major effect on Wisconsin. As I always say,
all they have to do is move a few people.
It's absolutely correct, Esme. I mean, anything that moves a few thousand voters here, a few thousand voters there, could have a huge effect on the presidential election outcome in Wisconsin. And then what happens in Wisconsin can decide what happens nationally.
Just looking back, to 2016, obviously Western Wisconsin has sort of solidified its spot in the Republican pantheon of states. Do you see any differentiation from that this time around?
It's hard to say because Western Wisconsin is well known for being a swingy area. It kind of goes back and forth between the two parties, and there does seem to be a disproportionate number of independent voters or persuadable voters. So I think the campaign is really going to make a big difference in Western Wisconsin. Who can make the best case to the voters in this part of the state? I think that ultimately is up for, that is a real open question at this point, and I think the campaign is going to make a big difference in determining how Western Wisconsin goes.
The chair of the Democratic Party in Wisconsin, Ben Wikler, says that the redistricting that occurred earlier this year, where there's more proportionate districts leaning a little bit more equally between Democrat and Republican, is going to basically gin up the Democratic vote. People are going to come out and be enthusiastic, and that's going to carry all the way up to the presidential race. Do you see it that way?
I think it's plausible, and we need to consider that this is the first time in over a decade when there's been real uncertainty about which party is going to have majority control of the state assembly. And that is a direct result of the Wisconsin State Supreme Court invalidating the previous district maps and opening the way for new district maps to be put into place. Democrats had been stuck in minority status for over 10 years, and now they've got a shot at winning majority control of at least one chamber in the state legislature. I think that's going to really energize the party, but the top of the ticket really matters too. How people vote for president definitely predicts how they vote down the ballot. So I'm certainly watching those lower level down ballot races for state assembly and state senate, but the presidential election really matters as well.
The Republican convention in Milwaukee, President Trump referred to Milwaukee as a horrible city. Apparently, there was a plan for him to stay in Chicago and fly up or drive up to Milwaukee for the days of the convention that he is there. Does that hurt him at all, those comments? He obviously sort of walked them back. He's going to stay in Wisconsin. And does it help the Republicans to have this convention in Wisconsin? Do they get a boost in voting from that?
I think it's symbolically meaningful. Republicans have had a complicated relationship with Milwaukee. Milwaukee is obviously an economic and cultural powerhouse in Wisconsin. After all, it's the largest city here. Yet Republicans have often pointed to Milwaukee as being emblematic of a high crime area, as being emblematic of a dysfunctional city. So the relationship has been complicated when we look at the Republican Party and Milwaukee. I would have to note that Milwaukee is also a wild card in elections. What type of turnout are we going to see in Milwaukee? And are Republicans going to be able to pick up some ground in what is typically a very blue part of the state? I think those are relevant questions to ask when we think about how the election might turn out.
Well, are you also looking at, do you think it's possible that Democrats could pick up votes in Western Wisconsin?
Absolutely. I think Democrats are eager to campaign intensely in Western Wisconsin because although Western Wisconsin is going more and more in the Republican direction, at least it has in recent cycles, it's not solidly in the Republican camp. I think if Democrats have the right candidates with the right message and the right amount of resources, they can pick up some ground in Western Wisconsin, and that would make a big difference.
All right. Well, Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, email me with comments and suggestions at esme@cbs.com. The show streams every Wednesday and Thursday night on CBS News Minnesota. On Friday, it posts to YouTube for on-demand viewing. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.